Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dexian webinar, Decoding AI, Ethics, Efficiency, and the Candidate Experience. I'm Cheryl Hardy, and I'm with the Dexian marketing team, and I'm going to be your host today. We have a very exciting session lined up with some really powerful industry experts who are going to share their insights on the evolving landscape of AI in talent acquisition. So, first, I would love to introduce our esteemed panelist. Going to start with Pat Quagrello. He's the Vice President of Delivery at Dexian. He's got over 20 years of experience in the field. Pat focuses on building strong relationships and delivering exceptional talent to our clients here at Dexian. Next up, we have Rich Mendis, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at HireLogic. He brings over 25 years of enterprise software experience, and he's a key figure in responsible AI standards. And finally, we have Michael Rochelle. He's the Chief Strategy Officer and Principal Analyst at Brandon Hall Group. And he has nearly 40 years of executive leadership experience. I want to thank you, big thank you to our panelists and to all of our attendees joining us today. So we're going to talk next about our agenda. Today, we're going to discuss the role of AI in HR and recruiting, the important and ever-evolving ethical considerations associated with AI. We're going to take a look at the Dexian HireLogic partnership and explore the approach and benefits and ROI we've experienced through our own implementation with HireLogic. And then finally, we're going to take a look at the future of AI in talent acquisition. We'll also have a live Q&A session at the end of the conversation. So feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar in the chat, and we will use our Q&A portion of today's call to address those. So let's get started. So, Rich, I know that AI has been around for decades, but large language models have definitely created a resurgence in interest. Can you elaborate a little on this?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Cheryl. AI has been around for some time, and I believe we have a slide here on kind of the different applications that have been, deployed in a variety of modes in both business to business and business to consumer segments. For any of you who've ever gone to Google and done a search, which I'm sure is everyone on this call, as you're typing in the Google search bar and it brings up some suggested items, that's AI running in the background. If you've ever gone into, a analytics dashboard at work, there's lots of AI around, the forecasting of information, predictive analytics. We've seen examples of sentiment analytics being used in work where you're trying to understand the sentiment of a survey respondents, for example. Computer vision, we've all probably experienced this, even when you go into certain video conferencing solutions and it blurs your background, trying to detect you as you're moving and detect where to blur. That's an example of AI in use. So there have been plenty of examples of this. And in the talent acquisition and recruiting space, whenever you're doing searching and matching, there's lots of companies that use AI in trying to determine, search criteria and matching and recommendations. But in the last year or so, with the advent of, or release of ChatGPT from OpenAI, I think there's been a massive, awareness, if you will, of AI and how it can help both in business and our own, personal lives. Generative AI is one example of that, where you use large language models or small language models that are trained on highly specialized data to generate new content in response to a prompt. And so that's kind of, open the floodgates in terms of lots of new applications. And we'll talk about, some uses of those applications in talent acquisition and recruiting today.
Awesome. So, Michael, I know that there's a growing focus. So, if we move forward to the next slide, there's a growing focus on leveraging technology to enhance efficiency, to reduce cost. Can you talk to us about those trends and the role that AI plays in the minds of today's leaders? And also, Rich, would love for you to weigh in. I know we've got some stats up here that talk about some of the trends that we're seeing. Tell us a little bit more about this landscape and those trends and the part that AI is going to play with HR leaders.
Well, the practical part of this is most HR teams are working with less people and less budget. Yet the needs of the business haven't diminished, they've only grown exponentially. So many folks out there are looking for AI to be able to level the playing field, to be able to make up for these things where people say I have to do more than ever with less. So scalability, flexibility, adaptivity, sustainability, being able to get some more consistency and make up for these shortcomings, is one of the big promises that HR teams will be delivered. I also think too that they're hoping that it'll help with getting rid of a lot of the manual aspects. So even when we were fully staffed and fully budgeted, there were a lot of inconsistencies and fragmented siloed processes that were created during the pandemic and post-pandemic. I don't think a lot of organizations have necessarily recovered from all of that. And so AI creates the promise of kind of smoothing things out again, getting back on track, being agile, being able to be, quite frankly, move HR at the speed of business.
Right. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah, and
Richard.
one quick
Yeah.
comment just to add to that. It's a very good point Michael made about having to do more with less, and I think that's a theme we'll see throughout the coming years as AI starts to get adopted. Pat's going to talk about this in terms of how Dexian's deploying AI, but it's not necessarily about AI replacing jobs. We hear a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around AI replacing lots of jobs, but rather it's about how jobs will be transformed, where it's a combination of humans and AI working together to achieve more, get more done with less, or in the case of even AI, perhaps being more objective and unbiased. And so I think that's why you're going to see like the stats reflected here, from Gartner. Indeed, these are relatively recent statistics. Indeed, in particular, it's worth noting that nearly 90% of HR and talent acquisition decision makers are currently using AI tools. So I think we're going to see more and more adoption. Again, not necessarily to replace humans, but to augment us. And the question is going to be, how do we, in HR, use these tools responsibly if they're going to indeed augment the decisions we're making?
Right. So, Rich, can you talk to us a little bit about some ways that you're seeing AI being used in talent acquisition?
Yeah, absolutely. I've spoken on this at length in previous webinars. I think if you look at the kind of overall process of recruiting, right, from before you even go and post a job, you're probably having a discussion with a hiring manager about a one or more roles they're trying to fill. And often, we're challenged to align those recruiting efforts with the expectations and requirements of those hiring managers. So one area that AI can help with is in natural language processing or conversational analytics, to listen to those conversations and use generative AI to actually generate a job description, skills required, a day in the life of that role, and even interview questions to ask based on the conversation with the hiring manager about the roles that they're trying to hire for. Then when it comes to receiving applicants, there's a lot of great solutions out now that do fairly sophisticated AI-powered resume analysis, right? So parsing the data from resumes and not just using the old school method of searching for keywords, but actually
Right.
more efficient and more accurate candidate matching, right? Based on analyzing job descriptions, analyzing resumes, and going beyond just the title and keywords to see, do the people actually have the skills and experience required for the job? We'll talk a little bit about kind of, how HireLogic is being used, but being able to automatically detect any compliance issues, for example. We know that the world of compliance is only getting more complex in terms of what you
Right.
can or cannot ask during interviews. And so it's almost impossible to have a human audit every single interview you're doing in an organization, but having conversational analytics and AI listen to those conversations and perhaps flag potential non-compliant issues could be a huge time and risk reduction mechanism. And then finally, there's this one in the center. It's a bit of a technical term, but RAG trained chatbot stands for retrieval augmented generation, where you can have AI solutions actually train chatbots on the conversations that you're having, and you can go back and ask questions or search for candidates based on discussions that you've had in the past to be a lot more efficient and effective at finding knowledge and information. So these are just a few examples. There's plenty more, but it's pretty exciting to see the breadth of where AI can is being applied to talent acquisition.
Love it. I know one of the things that we're going to touch on and we'll come back to in this conversation a little bit ahead is, and you mentioned it already, it's important that AI be used to augment, right, as opposed to making decisions on behalf of talent acquisition professionals. And I know when we look at the next slide, there's an interesting breakout here where you kind of cover and talk about how AI should be used to support versus make the decisions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I often get asked, hey, there's a lot of kind of uncertainty around regulations in this space, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. And so, how do we ensure that we're using AI in a manner that's responsible? And I think that what it fundamentally comes down to is making sure that whatever AI solutions you're using in the scope of human capital is tools that are not removing the human from the decision making, right? So
Right.
if anything that's surfacing results, analyzing data, providing information to you that would otherwise take you lots of time to figure out on your own is fine. But at the end of the day, the decision on whether to hire or fire or promote somebody should ultimately be made by humans. So there's a couple of examples here of solutions. One of, and I think Dexian's using one or both of these now, where, you can invite conversational analytics like HireLogic and others to listen to a conversation between a candidate and an interviewer, and the AI will automatically extract and summarize information about that conversation. What were the potential strengths, skills discussed, candidate experience, compensation, etc., so that the recruiter is not having to look down and take notes. But ultimately, the AI doesn't necessarily say whether you should or shouldn't hire the person. That's still up to the recruiter to decide whether they want to pass that person on to the next stage or not. But the process of making that decision becomes a lot more efficient, right? Similar with resume analysis and matching technology, it's important that the AI shows you why it recommends, or provides a certain score for a candidate so that it can be explained. There's this notion called explainability, and good solutions will offer the ability to provide this explainability and make sure that it is supporting or augmenting human decision making rather than making the decision on behalf of the human. And it's a fine but very important line to follow.
And Cheryl, that point that Rich is making, there's a lot of fear around recruiters being replaced by AI.
Yes.
And if you can look at the two examples that Rich talked about here on these two slides, or on this particular slide, this is augmenting. This is helping the recruiter. There's no replacing piece to either of these two use cases. It's actually making their job better and making them more efficient. And so it just takes the time to explain what it is and what the use case is and how it helps them to help them get the adoption and buy-in.
Got it.
I heard a great
Got it.
quote from one of our other customers. He said, it's not that AI will replace humans, it's that humans using AI will replace those who do not. And I think, that's going to be the of the next, few years here.
I love that. I love that. That's awesome. Michael, anything you want to add there from the HR leader perspective, the CHRO perspective?
Yeah, I think we also have to be like fair balance that AI is not just an HR enabler. We're hoping that it has impact for the people that are interacting in the talent acquisition cycle. And I think automatically, if I know that AI is being used and I'm a candidate, I'm going to feel better that what I've done in my career, what my accomplishments are, my applicability, like I feel like I'm going to get an enhanced look at all of this versus someone who, let's face it, I've hired people for 40 years. You like the color blue, I like the color blue too. You like to fish, I like to fish. I really like this person. I really feel that, and especially in the world of DEI, I think AI is going to help us to really have the candidates feel that we're taking the best look at them. We're taking into consideration everything about them, both on how they'd be a great cultural fit, do the job, ability to be promoted, all of these things. I'd be very excited as a kid, as long as, and I think everyone's made the point, AI is going to be balanced with the HI. You need the human intelligence in there to balance all that. But I'd be pretty excited if I were a candidate, knowing that there's a little bit of science added to this now, a little bit of greater perspective and broader perspective.
I love that. I think it's a great point. And I think, again, one of the things that's come up in our own experience partnering with HireLogic, right? The advantage for recruiters is by taking some of these steps and making them easier, taking some things off of the recruiter's plate. I would argue that they are actually able to be more present during the conversation, right? Because they're not focused on multitasking and doing all of these, various activities at the same time. So from that perspective, it's, one could argue you might be getting better, more focused engagement from the recruiter. So interesting.
Another practical use case around that is we used to do, everyone's done it. You do cutoffs, like the first 700 people, you can't get past the first 700 people. That's it. The 701st person could have been the ideal candidate. Now we have the opportunity to take into consideration as many people as we want, really scrub it out to make sure that we're not missing the person because we had an arbitrary cutoff. When my talent acquisition team, they used to come and say, I can't look at any more people. That I couldn't sleep at night because I was like, well, maybe it's the person that we didn't meet. So there's so many cool things from the candidate side that I'm in. Like I don't have to worry about, did I make it to Disney World and buy the express pass for this ride? Am I ever going to make it in my life? Like everyone's going to get a good look at me, and I'm going to win or lose this opportunity based on my own merits, not whether or not I read the advertisement, too late and I can't get into the cycle.
Exactly. I love that. So I know, kind of dovetailing into this conversation, we're talking a lot about, recruiters and job seekers, their concerns, their fears around AI. As we're embracing these technologies, and we're hearing those reservations from the public around, regulatory and ethical considerations that come with them. We want to talk a little bit about that AI regulation space, looking at the current landscape, the ethical implications, and how companies can navigate these challenges. So, Rich, can you talk to us a bit about those regulatory and ethical concerns as it relates to AI in HR and staffing? Kind of outline for us the things that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's this is going to be a dynamic and kind of messy space for the next few years as, you know, national and local governments deal with not just AI in HR, but AI in general. I'm sure you guys have seen there's lots of concerns about impersonation of people and things like that. So lots of kind of laws and regulations being discussed and passed. At a high level, what we're seeing is that the initial focus of these AI regulations are all around discrimination and privacy protection in HR, right? So making sure that AI is, again, not replacing human decision making, right? When it comes to personnel decisions. And you can see these are just a few examples of regulations that have been passed recently. In the European Union, there was the EU AI Act that was drafted way back in 2019, and now it was recently passed this year. Canada, Australia, and China have a variety of different regulations around this. Internationally, what tends to happen as regulation evolves is there are these government mandates, and then people put together kind of voluntary guidelines and standards of how to comply, and those become sort of normalized in the industry. So if you've heard of ISO standards like ISO 9001, which is a quality standard, and there's information security ones, things like that, there's an emerging AI management system standard called ISO 42001, and that will start to become sort of one of the standards by which you know, bias and hallucinations and all these things are looked at from an overall AI management system perspective, and vendors will start to adopt those. We're one of the only HR vendors that's on the US national body working on that standard. But as these things evolve, we'll see more adoption. And if we go to the next slide, I'm sure people are wondering, well, what about the US? So there's no national kind of guidance around this right at the moment. I did a webinar recently with the commissioner of the EEOC, Keith Sonderling, and the EEOC has some guidelines around this. But generally speaking, what we're seeing in the US, as often happens, is that these regulations are driven at the state and local level. So, for example, in New York City, they recently passed a local law that impacts the use of automated employment decision tools, where you either have to disclose or do adverse impact studies on those tools. Maryland and Illinois have laws on the books related to use of AI when you're doing video interviews, right? Because you don't want to use images to kind of come to conclusions about whether someone is telling the truth or you know, excited about the job or things like that. And we'll see similar, you know, regulations being passed in other states as this evolves. This is not even a comprehensive list. You can see on the right here, since 2016, and this is, you know, not even that recent, the data, it's even worse now, the number of AI level or state level AI related bills that are being proposed are just skyrocketing. And I think, you know, against this backdrop of this uncertainty, and this is something that the EEOC commissioner said as well, there's already laws on the books that, you know, prevent you from discrimination. So you should be able to use whatever technology you want. You just have to make sure that you're not using it in a way that discriminates, right? So by all means, you know, utilize AI to help you be more efficient in hiring and even reduce some of the more mundane tasks so you can free up the human to make more of those decisions. And so don't, you know, even though this is kind of an uncertain regulatory environment, I don't think you should necessarily use that as an excuse to say, oh, we should stay away from AI. Because if you do that, I think there's, you know, a situation where you might get left behind, or worse, you'll continue to propagate some of the very obvious human unconscious bias that already exists in the absence of AI.
Yeah, I love that. You know, so as we look at, you know, we talk about AI or human bias, right? And you've kind of set the stage for the next question around this, you know. So I know you had that great conversation with the EEOC commissioner. You and I had a chance to connect about that. What were some of the key takeaways, you know, that you gathered from that conversation with Commissioner Sonderling? And what is it critically important that we help job seekers and companies understand about bias in AI?
Absolutely.
I think
So
there you go.
Yeah, I think, as mentioned, if you put aside AI for a moment, and I know, Michael and Pat can probably speak to this as
Mhm.
well based on their experience. There's plenty of studies that show that humans are prone to, subjective bias. It's just the nature of how we are, right? We tend to
Right.
um, look for things that match the patterns that we like, right? We listen for what we want to hear. We like people who like what we like, and so there's plenty of studies, and you can see some stats here where even recently, I think CNN had a story about a gentleman who was applying for jobs and he couldn't get any, responses, even though he had lots of experience in that area. And he literally changed the name on the resume and left everything else the same. And he got all of a sudden a lot more responses. And so it's just the nature of how humans are. We tend to be imperfect creatures, and we often make subjective decisions. And in fact, the only reason AI has bias to begin with is because it's trained on the biases
Right.
that humans have created. So I
Right.
think, we have to be certainly careful of and aware of the biases that can exist in AI and not propagate those, but understand that humans are not perfect either. And so the question isn't whether or not to use AI in HR, but how to use it so that you can augment human decision making, not replace it. You can do more of those repetitive tasks, giving humans more time to make important decisions. And, you can run experiments to see if, in fact, there are impacts being made, because you can run it in parallel with the human only or
Right.
existing process.
Right. Michael, Pat, any thoughts you want to add to that?
Pat,
And
do you want
that's
to jump?
the case study that I'll talk about in a few minutes. It is there to help repetitive tasks to give our recruiters more time. So I agree with Rich. I think that the areas that it can extremely help our business in the staffing industry and the recruiting side, it still allows the decision making to sit at the recruiter level, but it will automate those manual tasks and just create more efficiencies.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think we'd only add to this that, we have laws for everything. We have speed limits on the highway. It doesn't replace a governance model. People speed every day past the speed limit, right? The
Yeah.
most important thing that you can put in place, and we recommend this when we work with organizations that are incorporating Gen AI, is have a good governance model. You still have to
Right.
defend your actions. So,
Right.
we get in a jam every single day with regulations, right? Companies get jammed up. Their interpretation of it, they think they did it right. You got to be able to justify and rationalize what you're doing. And in this case, the recruitment process or sourcing process. You have to show it's fair and unbiased. So the laws really aren't going to help you to do that. It's going to be, can you stand up and be able to say, I made this decision process? Because if you get yourself into a jam, Gen AI is not a safe harbor situation. In fact, I think I would predict that people are going to say, if they do get themselves in a jam, that Gen AI isn't a safe harbor. You are still have a fiduciary responsibility as being a human being in the process to decide the right outcome. So, I would advocate, this is great to know, but in the end, you have to build a governance model that puts you in a position to defend, whether for good reason or a bad reason. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think in the research that we do, when we ask what are the greatest challenges around Gen AI, bringing Gen AI into the building, it's governance. It's not technology providers. It's not the promise of it. It's this thing comes into the building, as an analogy, it's like, would you bring a torch with an open fire into your house for the purposes of heating up the house and cooking food? No, you'd probably burn the house down in the process.
Right.
We got to look at Gen AI as fire. So it's up to us that before we bring it into our organization, we have to build some guidelines around it so that we can get the best use of it without burning the building down. And so I think a good governance model goes with everything that Rich covered.
So, Michael, to that point, something I want to ask as in response to that is, do you think that that's one of the reasons why we are seeing organizations um, a bit slow in adopting and embracing and leveraging AI in their process. Do you think that's contributing to that
Oh,
that
it's
slow path?
absolutely, it's clearly the number one that we say.
Yeah.
It's the number one
Yeah.
reason. It's so, to balance what Rich was pointing out is the more opaque you are as a provider from a transparency, explainability,
Mhm.
responsibility in Gen AI, the more you seem like a black box to a buyer. So, or to an organization like your show. So you kind of promulgate or you proliferate, the problem. So you got the governance is going to be great, but then they have to talk to providers that are willing to be transparent. I mean, Gen AI didn't fall out of the sky. It wasn't like this was built by people. So there's inherent bias in all the training models. We're going to catch up with the QC, QA. We're going to figure out how to keep things on the rails. You've got to go in eyes wide open that you have to ask providers, like a great company, like what Rich is representing, to get to what is in there. And then how do I prepare for that? And that's on me from a governance standpoint. So putting those two together, and that's the chief reason why people are going slow. The other thing is just an opinion as an outside expert is there is this highly, almost hyper competitive environment about which model to use. Like it's got way out there. Like everyone's got an interest in this. OpenAI's got their interest, Google's got theirs, Microsoft,
Right.
Anthropic. They're all protecting their turf, and there's other ones coming. So, do we have to know all of that as a recruiter to be able to make a decision? What happens if a provider's made a decision? Well, is that a good decision, a bad decision? This is why you have to kind of, organizations are saying, I've got to think this through. So the basis is where you're going to get that information. It's great to come to a webinar like this. You're going to get great information, but you have to do your homework so that you feel comfortable that whomever you invite into the building, it's the right decision, and you can defend that decision. And that's why organizations are saying things like, I don't even know if I have the right competencies and skill set in my team to actively go through and ascertain. Like if you ask me for a requirements document for an applicant tracking system, I could do that in my sleep. But when you add Gen AI to the equation, do people really even know what the right questions are? So it kind of all is the same thing. And that is why I think HR teams are not necessarily being slow, but they're, the last thing you want to do is jump from the frying pan into the fire, right? So whoever helps is going to make that particular organization go faster.
Love it. Got it. Thank you.
Hmm.
So based on all of this, right, we want to talk a little bit about Dexian's journey, right, and our partnership with HireLogic, and provide our participants today an example of how AI can be used successfully in recruitment. And we think we've got a pretty powerful case study for that. So, Q, I am going to ask you to walk us through our partnership with HireLogic, and talk a little bit about how we're leveraging those solutions to transform our recruitment journey.
Great. Thanks, Cheryl. Yes, I'm
Yeah.
definitely excited to show and discuss the keys to a successful AI implementation. Also want to tell the story about the Dexian use case with HireLogic and how it's impacting our business. The first key to success is the executive buy-in. Here at Dexian, our CEO, Maruf Ahmed, has made and committed to a significant investment around AI solutions. Maruf is constantly pushing us as leaders to be innovative. Our COO, Tara Wynn, has recently appointed an AI innovation manager to oversee all of our AI implementations. And it ensures our transparency to the stakeholders and obviously making sure that we're aligned to our vision and strategy. Like others on this call, I've been a part of other industry conferences and webinars, and as you can see, that it's a definite struggle, and I think companies are trying to figure out how to start, where to start, and where to jump in. At Dexian, we've created an AI innovation team that champions all innovation and AI strategy. It's dedicated to evaluate cutting-edge AI technologies and solutions, whether developed internally or sourced externally. The goal is to leverage AI effectively by driving operational efficiency and delivering value and including making it a great experience for our customers, our consultants, and our clients. Another key is to have a trusted partner aligned to your key goals and objectives. And we've been very fortunate over the last 12 months to partner with HireLogic, AC, their CEO, Vivek, the Chief Product Officer, Rich, who's on this call, the Chief Marketing Officer. That they've been great to work with, very collaborative. HireLogic is extremely flexible and fits with our Dexian workflow. So now I'd like to move to the next slide and talk about the Dexian case study. At Dexian, we focus our recruiting around our relational delivery model. We believe in building long-lasting relationships that will enhance the candidate experience and consultant experience. As you know, staffing industry, the recruiting industry, it's extremely difficult. There's tons of challenges, a lot of competition.
Right.
At Dexian, we have a delivery board that oversees all of our recruiting. And so the delivery board is constantly thinking of ways by leveraging technology to allow all of our recruiters to spend more meaningful conversations with our consultants. So if we can use AI or automate, manual tasks, or even improve the recruiter workflow, it's going to allow us to give a better candidate experience and to push and create for more business efficiencies. When we communicated our HireLogic case study or launch to our small pilot group, we initially had a major pushback. The change management was much greater than I anticipated. We had to get our leaders to buy in. Then we had to teach our recruiters the why and how HireLogic works and to show them the value and what it's going to save them in terms of time. No one likes to document conversations into their ATS. So as soon as the small pilot group finally adopted it, we quickly expanded to all our new hires. We moved quickly to our US and India operations and launched those successfully as well. So you might be sitting here asking, well, what is HireLogic and what's the value to a Dexian recruiter? HireLogic, as Rich was talking about earlier, it's an AI tool that can be integrated with any video or phone conversation you initiate with a candidate. The tool generates smart notes automatically that goes right into our ATS, which is Bullhorn. It provides a detailed synopsis of the candidate based on the conversation. So the benefit to our Dexian recruiters, it saves time. No one wants to put the notes in. They forget to put the notes in. I'll do it at the end of the week. It increases candidate engagement, as you were mentioning, Cheryl. It allows our recruiters to spend more time with the candidate, ask more open-ended questions without worrying about taking the notes. It increases faster submittals to our clients because the synopsis that it generates is extremely powerful, and we can leverage that. It improves the data quality in our ATS, which is Bullhorn, because it has a Dexian format to it that HireLogic was very easy to work with us to do. And then the last thing, it's really easy to use with Teams and Zoom, and it's and through some phone conversations as well as in person. And the next slide, we recently looked at the data to see the impact with HireLogic on our recruiters. We used the recruiting population and looked back 3 months prior to using HireLogic. And then we looked at the following 3 months after those recruiters were using HireLogic. The data shows very clearly that the frequent and highly frequent users had increased all their KPIs, including their results. And as you can see on the screen, 14% more screening interviews, 23% more candidates sent to hiring managers, 41% more hiring manager interviews, and the best part, 38% more candidates placed. In closing, Cheryl, I'm very grateful for our partnership with HireLogic as we move further and further along the AI journey. The cleanliness and the quality of the data goes a long way for us to be critical to use future AI technologies and to drive our business at Dexian. And as we push forward with AI, we'll continue hopefully to see all the progress and the results. Rich,
Sure,
anything to add?
for
It's been a
sure.
great partnership so far.
No, this is, look, it's always people, process, and technology, and people and process is the stuff that everyone underestimates. I'm sure Michael can relate to that, right? When rolling out stuff like this. So it's been great to have the leadership from Pat and Maroof and others, kind of drive this down. And these results are a testament to what you can achieve when you combine that human with AI efficiency, right? 41% more hiring interviews is just incredible, and nearly 40% more candidates placed. I mean, these are amazing numbers, and this is just based on kind of the initial rollout. So hopefully we'll continue to see things, improve from there.
Yeah,
I
I'd
know
like to
one of the
offer
things
like
that comes to mind. Oh, Michael,
I was
please
going
go
to just
ahead.
say,
Sorry.
so just to let the folks know how extraordinary these numbers are. When we work with organizations on process improvement, we say that a remarkable improvement, and this is over a 12-week period, over a 52-week period, we would have them target 10 to 15% improvement. So these numbers are just crushing that. I mean, just for the audience to put it in perspective is, when I look at these numbers, like these numbers are way off the chart as far as improvement. Most would focus on 10 to 15% improvement over a 52-week period. So it's really an extraordinary case study.
That's great. That's actually really, really great to hear. I know one of the things that I wanted to ask Pat, sorry, about when we think about these gains, right, and we see the efficiency that we're um, witnessing in the use and application of these tools. We think a lot about experience, right, at Dexian, thinking about the experience of our consultants, the experience of our clients. Can you tell me, from your perspective, what's the value to the consultant experience when you see this kind of optimization and this kind of increased enhancement and efficiency? Do they feel the impact of that?
Oh yeah, especially around the experience piece where they know we're using AI, they understand that this is there to help them. They're understanding that their conversations with our recruiters are better with them because we can focus. And then ultimately,
Hmm.
it's about helping them find jobs, right? And so
Right.
if we're doing it better, more efficiently, and with a better experience, they're happy. And then we can continue that journey with Dexian and and redeploy them on their next project.
I love that. And I think that's going to go a long way towards managing and providing some assurance when we think about all the fears associated with AI in the HR process and the hiring process. Um, I want to talk a little bit about what's next and recommendations that we may have, right? So we've covered a lot about the current trends. We've talked about some best practices and considerations. We've covered the ethics, successful implementation. I would like to get your perspectives on what's coming up next for AI. So I have a couple questions that I've got lined up, and I'll get to those in just a second. But Rich, could you talk a little bit about um, some of the content that we have here and how professionals and job seekers need to prepare for the future?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. This is a tough one because, I think AI will evolve in a non-linear way. We're already
Mhm.
seeing, leaps and bounds in terms of the, capabilities of large language models and image processing and video generators and all these things. And the next frontier is this notion of AI agents, right? So this is augmenting our human workforce with AI capabilities that actually perform tasks in an automated way behind the scenes. So imagine a recruiter saying, "Hey, I've got this job that I want to fill, and here's the type of resource that, you know, would be an ideal fit. This is something we're working with Dexian on in another project, right? This is the type of resource I want. Go out and find me people that look like this. And this agent will go out and actually perform tasks behind the scenes. It might even start reaching out and seeing if someone's available for a call, and then come back to the recruiter and say, hey, these are the people that are a good fit, and, you know, they're available at these times. Can you take a call? So I think we're going to start to see AI evolve to that point where, you know, it's doing more tasks and can help automate things further. Jobs, we'll start to see jobs evolve. So anyone who's in recruiting will start to see job descriptions and requirements that start to, you know, include things like needs to be familiar with these AI tools and all of those things. And I think, you know, there's opportunities to also level the playing field when it comes to people with certain disabilities or minorities. So if English isn't your first language, for example, or whatever the native language is in the country you're in, AI translation is getting so good now that you may not, you know, your deficiency in a language may not be an impediment to you performing a job anymore, right? Or if you have a certain physical disability, AI can, you know, accommodate for that physical disability in ways that you know, maybe it wasn't able to before. And it's going to pose some interesting challenges for HR. I'm sure Michael, you know, deals with perhaps, you know, these issues as he talks to broader, you know, CHROs and stuff, but the workforce is going to change, and, you know, people are going to be doing more moonlighting or side jobs and things like that because AI makes them so efficient that they have time to do other things. And this can result in this kind of notion of hyper productivity, but it's important to have policies and to Michael's point earlier, the governance model in place, so that can be, you know, done to the benefit of all the parties, the employer, the employer, employee, the employer, and, you know, in the case of staffing, the candidates.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
Michael, from your perspective, any thoughts or considerations that you would add there in terms of what we see happening in the future in the space?
Yeah, there's a few. One that I think is intriguing is, I think any any HR professional that's out there in the audience right now is most likely found that a vast majority of the people they'd like to hire aren't currently looking. You know, it's just one of those things. Great people, you know, sometimes are not actively looking. I think, and that's very time consuming to try to figure that all out. I think what Gen AI is going to help with is to penetrate those opportunities. Like, imagine having a digital assistant monitor someone that you really like and offering drip campaigns and information about your company, and just kind of doing a passive recruitment process. Like, imagine if you could wake up every day and say, I've got 20, 25 people I have my eye on, and Gen AI is making sure that the moment that they might want to think about something different, I'm going to know. The other thing I think it's going to help with too is, and I live this as a head practitioner, is you're recruiting and you're recruiting and recruiting, and it would have been nice if someone told me that there was no one that met our requirements in a 500-mile radius. Like, if we had just moved over 4 zip codes, the world is a better place, right? And then I'd have a different decision whether I want them to work hybrid, remote, you know. Gen AI is going to tell us that faster, so that we don't keep beating our heads against the wall expecting a different outcome. It'd be very nice to know within a matter of minutes that everything you're offering, nobody matches that. I think Gen AI is also, we haven't talked much about it, is as an insights tool. I would like to know, not 30 days from now, 60 days from now, when I have business stakeholders screaming at me saying, are we ever going to hire someone in my lifetime? Is for Gen AI to come back quickly and say, you have to change your compensation for this role. You have to change your benefit structure. You have to offer this, you have to offer that, because what you're offering to the market, nobody cares. You're never going to find someone. And then I also think too, the third one is, this is all going to get pointed at a larger conversation I love to have, which is just talent acquisition isn't just an external function. People move around in companies all day long. People want opportunities to move around, internal mobility, transitions within an organization. Gen AI is going to help us to say, you're overlooking this person just because they're not jumping up and down and they're not going fishing with their boss every day and trying to win their like, how do we keep track of people within it that they would be a great candidate for this role as well? And then use Gen AI to say, what are the pluses and minuses of looking externally versus internal? One thing I don't want to do is over-engineer towards external candidates and then upset the people thinking like, you're not looking at me. Now you can simultaneously look at people. Because I think eventually we're going to have to step up and explain what Gen AI's consequences in candidate recruitment, internally and externally. These are the things that we need to think about so we can offer fair balance conversation. And then the last thing I think we got to pay attention to is, are we going to be in a position with Gen AI to tackle the simple idea that there may not be anyone available right now? That sometimes is an answer. And if Gen AI can help us to say, we don't have this person available right now, I think it's kind of riffing off of the idea of contractors. I want to shift very quickly to maybe we have to bring in a gig person until we evolve this person. They're not in the market, they're not in internally. So what I'm trying to get at is you can hear a theme of speed to decision, I think is what Gen AI is going to help us. So this isn't a long, drawn out, awful process. Most hiring managers have had that space open for a while. It didn't happen like 30 minutes ago. These are open recs.
Yeah.
People are getting very crazy because they're filling in for these open positions. People are breaking points trying to find these people. I think Gen AI is going to help us to do this speed to decision, keep things monitored. So when the opportunity breaks and we can find the right candidate internally or externally, it's going to show up on our desktop instantaneously.
Yeah, definitely some big things to think about. Big things to think about. So I feel like that's a natural segue into the Q&A portion of this. We've had a really productive conversation. I know I've seen some questions pop up in the chat. So I wanted to kind of take some time to fire off a couple of these questions to our subject matter experts and get your thoughts. So Pat, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
You gave the compelling case study and use case for what we have done in our partnership with HireLogic. I know you've alluded to some ways that it can continue to impact our strategies. Can you talk to me about how you see AI transforming your talent acquisition strategies? As our delivery leader, what do you see in the future in the next 5 years?
When it comes to that, I think there's three things to think about. One, I think AI will do more of the initial work. I think it'll find candidates, be able to match the candidates relevant to what the managers want. I think number two, AI will help automate those time-consuming tasks. Rich was just talking about it, and that's the biggest, the biggest thing that I can help push with adoption, because it's going to help you save time to do the things that you need to do to stay productive. And number three, recruiters using AI will replace the ones that don't. And Rich mentioned that earlier, and it's, you can see it in the Dexian HireLogic use case. The ones that are highly frequently using HireLogic are getting better results.
Yeah, I love it. It's true. Michael, so we talked about AI adoption and the slow movement towards adoption. What advice would you give to HR leaders considering AI adoption or who are embarking on their own AI implementations?
We do a lot of evaluations, technology evaluations and selections for organizations. And what we tell them is this is where finding the right partner rather than the right solution provider is the key. It's like a contract. You can put as much language in, but you can't make up for goodwill. It's going to be things that happen, and you need a good partner. You need a good person on the other side of that agreement. that's what we recommend. And that actually is the #1 thing people are looking for. When you look at the research that we do, it's above any functionality, it's, can I find a great partner, not someone who's trying to solve a problem. So Gen AI is not going to stand still. I think we made that pretty clear to everyone over the last 55 minutes. So how do you make sure that you don't go into the weeds or do something wrong or not get it right? It's going to be a great partner. So when you look at an organization like Rich represents, that is the goodwill. You got to feel like someone's got your back. You're not working without a net. When things shift in the market, instead of having an anxiety attack, you just read something about Gen AI, you can call up Rich and his team and they can be like, yeah, we got that covered. So the most important thing you do in picking a provider is stop trying to solve the problem and see if they're a good partner. Are they going to be able to be there when you need them and help you to understand your situation?
Yeah, it's great advice. Great advice. Rich, when we think about the measures that organizations can put in place to ensure that AI recruitment is fair and unbiased, what would some of those recommendations be?
Yeah, I think there's several different levels of things you can do. I mean, first of all, I think Michael made a good point, and his organization helps companies sort of select these partners and technology vendors that have thought through these issues. But you want to be able to ask questions of your vendors that you're selecting that indicate that they've thought through, right? How do they handle AI bias, right? Is there enough diversity in the training data set that they're using? How have they thought through the way they present the data, so that they're not trying to, influence the human decision-making one way or the other, right? And that's kind of step one, is making sure you're picking, vendors or whatever the technology is that have thought through those issues, and organization analyst firms like Brandon Hall Group can help with that. The second is looking at your process to ensure that however you choose to deploy and wherever you choose to deploy AI, that at the end of the day, again, it's in the service of augmenting and supporting that human decision, not replacing it, right? So making sure that whatever the process is at the end, the final decision is ultimately up to the human or humans making that decision. And then you can become much more sophisticated if you want and do adverse impact studies. And if you Google this, there's plenty of documentation on it, but that's where you can actually test to see if a certain process where you've implemented technology, whether it's AI or something else, is having any adverse impact on a minority or underrepresented or protected classes. And there's specific formulas to calculate how that, to measure and calculate whether that's happening. And so if you want to go through to that extreme, you could certainly conduct an adverse impact study, but you probably don't have to go that far. You can start with some of the earlier things I mentioned to make sure that, that the solutions and technologies and vendors you're picking are following good principles, and that the process that you ultimately are supporting with AI ends with the human making the decision.
I love it. So there's one last question I want to fire at you guys before we move on to kind of wrapping up. I know we're at just about the hour of close for our conversation. This one came in from our participants, and I thought it was great. If you had one piece of advice for job seekers during this especially challenging time, when we think about AI and how we're leveraging it, what would that piece of advice to job seekers? What would that advice to job seekers be? So I'd love to hear from each of you, and then we'll close out our session today.
I'll do a quick one, and it's a real life situation.
Okay.
I was talking to a colleague at an academic institution, and their child was entering the workforce. Great credentials, went to a top school, couldn't get any hits, just wasn't happening, to the point where they were losing their confidence level. So they got him in touch with a resume expert that understands Gen AI, and said the reason why you're not getting any hits is you don't have a Gen AI friendly resume. Reworded it, put some different words in, restructured it, and they ended up getting several dozen hits in the same day. So the best advice I can give candidates is you've got some work to do on your end in order to show up on these tools and to be selected properly. So there's going to be you're going to need some help to get a Gen AI friendly resume put together so that you don't end up in this situation. And that is a real life situation. So I would say that's one big piece of advice for candidates.
I love that.
I was just going to add, the AI piece is not going to replace the relationship that you have with your recruiter and the company that you're leveraging to help find your next position. So be patient, but stay in contact with your recruiter, and it won't replace that.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
Rich?
I would say, two things. Number one, whatever field you happen to be in, whether it's IT or marketing or anything, look and see, kind of what AI solutions are in your space that happen to be, tools that people are using, and familiarize yourself with those, because chances are more likely than not that your job will increasingly involve the use of those AI tools. And number two, Google Dexian for job seekers and look at the fantastic jobs that Dexian has. This organization is really about, putting the human at the center of this. And, I can't speak enough to, how Dexian continues to focus on putting, humans and relationships at the center of this. So kudos to you guys. And anyone in IT should definitely check Dexian out.
Thanks,
Love
Rich.
it. Thank you. So we're a little over, but I just want to tell our audience, if we skip forward, there are resources that we are going to provide to you as thanks for registering and attending today. We've pulled together these array of resources. All of our participants, you're going to receive a communication from Dexian that's going to include a link to this session, as well as additional sessions that HireLogic and Brandon Hall Group have done that give good additional perspectives to all of us. And there are also some best practices, as we think about the Dexian journey and what we've learned in implementing AI. We've got some implementation, change management, and ROI best practices that we've included in what we call our AI implementation toolkit. So you'll be sure to check those out. And on that note, we went a couple minutes over, but I really enjoyed this conversation. And I thank our incredible panelists. You guys were absolutely, we knew that you would be. I love this conversation. Thank you for joining us today. And to our participants who were able to join us, thank you for joining us. We hope you found this informative and beneficial. And we hope to see you on another Dexian webinar very soon. So take care.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thanks, Cheryl.